fun. Hi, are we all met? Are we good? Okay, breathing. I love breathing. Good? Breathing. Okay. All right, so how does your breath affect your emotional state?
Huge. It's short, you're fired up. Yeah.
It's long, you're
Relaxed.
calm,
Shallow breathing.
anxious. Anyone had a panic attack? I've had panic attacks. Those are not fun. Right? That's like, can't breathe at all. How important is the breath in your yoga practice?
Very.
What makes yoga different than stretching? I think the breath is really, because we sort of mentioned earlier when we talked about the heart, is that breath is one of those things that through it, it's like a magical doorway through which we can affect the systems of the body that are not under our direct control, like our heart rate, like our blood pressure. But by controlling the breath, that's like this little key that opens the doorway to that. And that, more than any, like that's actually the secret power of the yoga practice, is its ability to do that and to affect the mind and the nervous system. Like more than stretching. Like stretching is cool, but really what brings people back is our ability to encounter all of these other systems of our body through breathing and through the meditation and the mindfulness techniques that we use during the practice. So breathing is much more than just a physiological process. It's really an emotional / spiritual process as well. Our breath is such a profound reflection of our emotions, our mindset, and our physical state that many cultures actually perceive it as a conduit of life force. And so you'll get the name anima, like for example, in Latin, which means spirit and means breath, right? Prana, Sanskrit, is life energy, and it also, pranayama, rides on the breath. So the breath is just a huge tool for us as yoga teachers. So this is a really beautiful module to dive into. So we're going to look at the breath and the role that breath plays in our emotional state and well-being. We'll look at basically how the mechanics of the breath and how that actually works in the body. And then look at some breathing techniques. So it's like I mentioned, like anima means spirit, chi in Chinese, prana in Sanskrit. All of these things are like breath and life energy, because the breath is intrinsically in. Like the first thing we do when we are born is breathe, inhale, and the last thing we do as we die is exhale. And it's like, you can live how long without food or water? How long can you live without a breath? Yeah.
6 minutes if you're a champion deep sea diver.
Up to 6 minutes. Or if they lower your body temperature, like some science fiction novel, then you can no longer. So let's just this brainstorm just for fun. Think about some words that actually link breathing to an emotional state. I'll give you an example. That was breathtaking. Any other words come to mind?
Like phrases or words?
Just whatever, phrases or words, either.
Like you took my breath away.
You took my breath, exactly. Right? It's just like how much we associate breathing with actually how we feel. I was in a suffocating relationship. It's so true.
Just an example.
It's just a random example that I picked out of nowhere. And what about like, that was so inspirational, right? Literally to inspire.
Yeah, you took my breath away.
Took my breath away.
Or if you're startled and you gasp, you really do.
Mm-hmm.
Like an adrenaline rush can do that too as well.
Exactly. So what I'd like you guys to do, we're going to do a little bit of breath awareness stuff. And we'll do this in partners. So this is just to give us a nice little soak into breathing into different parts of our bodies. So do we have an even or odd number? We have odd? Okay, so I'll work with someone.
Here we have an even number with Jen.
2, 4, 6, 8. Perfect. Great. All right. So get into partners. Ask your partner if you can touch each other. Actually, let me show you on. Can I demonstrate? Lucky, would you be my? I just want to show what we're going to do first. We'll come and lay down in semi-supine. So you want to lay down in a comfortable position, and you can either have your legs bent, or you can have your knees straight, whatever you prefer. And we'll want to ask. I'll be like, "Can I touch you?"
Yeah.
And this again is like all about, honestly, less is more. I'm receiving her, I'm not giving her like pressure. I'm actually trying to be sensitive to what's going on. So she's gonna just breathe there for a little while. And then I'm gonna take my hand, and don't worry, I'll talk you through this. I just wanted to show you first. So I'll take my hand and I'll place it on her belly. This is a very vulnerable thing to do. So thank you for letting me do this. It is, it's like, right? So I'll place my hand here, and all I'm doing, I'm not putting any pressure on her. It's just to bring her awareness to her belly. And it gives her just a little feedback to let her breath move there. And she doesn't have to do anything. Usually the breath naturally moves to where there's some sort of stimulus like this, just kind of goes. So I'll put my hand there. I'll bring my hand to the sides of her ribs. And so it's just for her to feel the breath in different parts of her body. And then I'm going to bring my hands. I'll come to the top here. So make sure you have some room above them. And to her collarbones, so I'm not pushing down. If anything, it's like a little bit of a lifting up. So it's for her to feel her breath in kind of her upper chest, like up into the collarbones, because our lungs are actually all the way up there, even though we may not think about it. So that's it, it's amazing. I can feel her breathing, it's so cool. And then I'll take my hands to the back of her skull, and she can close her eyes here. I'm just cradling and seeing if I can even feel her breath here, right? Yeah. And then you'll have, if we have time, we'll see how our timing goes. I may have her turn over and just turn her head to one side in a way that's comfortable. I think this is a nice one to do. And bring your hand to their back. Yeah. And her job is just to chill out and allow her breath to be moved to these different places. That's it. Okay? In fact, maybe we'll start off on our stomachs, just because this is a little bit less vulnerable than being face up. Cool? Yeah. Okay, get a partner. But just start by letting them just be. I know, we have to and pull your own energy back. Like sit in your own back body, let your eyes be soft. This is like the practice of being with the full human. So settle into your own body first, my lovely observers, and let your own body be calm. And whenever we touch someone for this kind of thing or for hands-on assists, we want to make sure that our body is in a position that feels really comfortable so that we're not tense. So I'd recommend maybe sitting beside your person just so it's easier to access them. And for a moment, just watch them breathe. And person who is breathing, begin to sense where your breath is in your body. Where do you feel it? There's no right answers here. Is it shallow? Is it deep? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is the inhale a different length than the exhale? And observers, you can watch them and see if you can tell the answers to these questions. And then really lightly place your hand on their lower back ribs. And let yourself almost feel them move into your hand. So you don't put weight on them, but instead let your hands be really sensitive. And then move your hand to their upper back, like between their shoulder blades. And then remove your hand, and breather, you can take your time to roll over onto your back. Either legs straight or knees bent, whatever feels more comfortable for you. And again, observer, just wait. Just notice if you're fast, slow down. Just let your own body weight settle. Feel your own breath. And then very lightly bring your hand onto their belly. And take a breath, and then take your hands to their outer ribs. So position yourself however you need to so that you are comfortable in your body. And then moving to sit by their head, and very lightly place your fingertips right below their collarbones, and the feeling is that there's a slight actual lifting up more than pressing down. So slight drawing up. Yeah, almost like right there. Yeah, see what happened? Very cool. And then slide your hands gently underneath their skull to cradle their head. So you can just place your fingertips there. You don't even have to lift their head, but to feel the fingertips at the base of their skull. Good, and then gently remove your hands. Everybody take a nice slow breath. Nice exhale out. Good. Just people, don't talk, please. And then just noticing for a moment how, breathers, how you feel. And then roll over onto one side, and then you guys can have a little confab about your experience. So, physiologically, why do we breathe? Yeah, oxygen. So we're taking in oxygen and we're giving off CO2. Why do we need to do that?
Because our muscles have been contracting. There's a waste.
There's a waste, yes. Our muscle contracting. So we need oxygen for cellular respiration and to create energy. And then CO2 is a byproduct of that. So we're constantly, it's amazing, like we're always in exchange with our environment, which is really beautiful. It's like we're literally taking the world in and exhaling out into the universe. And it's like the universe is always inside of us in some ways, which is really, it's kind of beautiful. We don't think about it, but we're so intrinsically linked to this, to our environment all the time. So yes, cellular respiration. The purpose of breathing is to bring in oxygen to fuel cellular function and expel carbon dioxide as a waste product. As a waste product. There are other benefits to breathing though as well. So to breathe, breathing requires movement. And there's two kinds of movement. There's the movement of like, well, we have to actually get the oxygen in and get the carbon dioxide out. So there's a movement that happens with our lungs and our diaphragm and our ribs, which is what we're going to look at. The other piece of movement is the actual transport of that oxygen and CO2 around our body. And that's a function of our cardiovascular system and our blood vessels. And so we'll look at that when we do the cardiovascular system. The movement that we're looking at today is like, well, how do I get this oxygen out here inside my body? And how do I get the CO2 out, right? So to understand how we breathe, it's helpful to understand the structures of the ribs and the abdominals, and we can divide this into two different cavities. The thoracic cavity, which is basically everything above the diaphragm, which as we'll see is this big muscle here. And then the abdominal cavity, which is all of this juicy, delicious viscera, liquidy, squishy goodness down here. So they have different properties. So how are these two cavities different from each other? So like what's the... Definitely location. Definitely. So what is this cavity filled with? What comes in here? Air. What's this filled with? Stuff. Squishy, fluid filled. It's like, this is like a basket of water balloons all squeezed in together. This is like an accordion. So do both of these change shape when we breathe? They both change shape, right? Sometimes your belly moves, sometimes your chest moves. Which one increases in volume? Do they both increase in volume? Like they change in shape, but does one of them get more stuff in it when we breathe?
The thoracic.
Yeah, this. We take in air, we literally take in air and it expands. Now the belly, although it changes shape, are we putting more stuff in there? No. How do we put more stuff in our belly? How do we get more stuff in this cavity? Eat a burrito. Like eat stuff, right? Then you put more stuff in here. Get pregnant. Get yourself knocked up. You're gonna put a big old baby in there, right? Take a poop. There's less stuff in there now. Have a nice pee. Less stuff in there now, right? But breathing doesn't change how much mass is in this cavity. So it changes shape, but it's not actually changing how much stuff is in there. However, our lungs here, we're actually taking in and expelling stuff. It's actually changing both shape, and also what's inside. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's just compare them. The thoracic cavity, by which we mean this top cavity, is air-filled. This is fluid-filled. Blah, 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 blah. Heart and lungs are up here, all your viscera, all your goodies are down here. Changes shape when we breathe? Yes, they both change shape and can be malleable when we breathe. Changes volume when we breathe? Yes, this does. It gets bigger. This one doesn't change volume. Connect the outside world via trachea and then the esophagus. So they both come in through the mouth. This one also, we could also say abdominal, also, you know, your anus. We're like a big tube. Right, we're a tube from the outside world all the way through, all the way out. Oh.
My husband always says that we're nothing but big feeding tubes with appendages, which is sort of...
It's kind of true. Think of an earthworm.
That's, yeah.
We're like a little earthworm, but smarter. So now we're going to look at the primary muscle of breathing, which is the diaphragm. So here's a picture of the diaphragm. We've taken out, it doesn't quite have its little legs on it, but this is the diaphragm. It lives right underneath the lungs. right? And it attaches down into the ribs. It's like a big parachute inside. The little legs actually come down a little, I'd say they come down a little further than this. And we've taken out all of the viscera so that you can actually see it. So it's like this, it's like a big umbrella inside, and it separates the two cavities. It separates the thoracic from the abdominal cavity. It's a flat sheet-like muscle that forms a dome. And actually it has a central tendon, so it has a tendinous, connective tissue in the middle that it attaches to, and then it attaches along the borders of the ribs. So it kind of sits inside of you like here. And this does most of the work of your breathing. And in fact, we take an average of 22,000 breaths a day. Whoa. We are so freaking cool. So the cool thing about this is that it's under our voluntary control, but also it works involuntarily, which is very helpful. Notice how it's raised on the right side to make room for your liver, because your liver is all snugly up in here. So what does the diaphragm look like? If you were going to think of an object in nature that it looks like, what? A mushroom. Anyone else? I think it looks like. A jellyfish. It does look like a jellyfish. There's a picture of a jellyfish. An umbrella. I like mushroom. Or like a dome. It's like a big dome-like thing. So it is not totally impermeable. There are structures that go through the diaphragm that connect the upper to the lower. Like, what's one thing that has to go through the diaphragm? Blood has to go through your diaphragm, right? Otherwise we'd be in trouble because your heart's up here. So it's got to get stuff down there. So you have big blood vessels that go through there. Yeah, well, yeah, your stomach, right, or the esophagus. You have to your stomach is underneath the diaphragm. So it is pierced by a few different things. Your aorta, big artery for getting blood to your lower body. Your esophagus, which goes down to your stomach. The vena cava, which returns blood back to your heart. And nerves. So it does have some holes in it. This is actually, you're looking up into the umbrella of the diaphragm. It's like you could stick your head into someone's thorax and peer up into what's happening. Right? And what's kind of cool here, can you see like the psoas? Right? So what's really neat, and your abdominals, they kind of like, they're connected. There's an interdigitation of some of these big muscles of your body with the diaphragm, which means that, like, there's a lot more when you breathe. The diaphragm is doing the heavy lifting, but other things impact it, for sure. Like your psoas, the functionality of your psoas may actually affect the functionality of your breath. How your abdominals are held or tight will affect how you breathe. So it's like all interconnected. So, let's play a video here. So this is just a nice graphic animation of breathing. It's kind of nice to see an animation of to see inside. See? So that's how the diaphragm moves up and down. You can see how it's attached to the lungs, you guys. So the lungs are kind of sticky-on-y to the diaphragm. And we'll look at why that's important in a little bit. And what's kind of cool is that as you breathe, see how the diaphragm descends? It kind of gives your internal organs a nice little squishy. We're going to talk about the ribs in a little bit, but the ribs actually help by, not the ribs, the intercostal muscles, inter between the ribs, actually helps you to breathe as well. And there's the lungs and the diaphragm. So do you guys know your lungs are stuck to your diaphragm?
I didn't know that.
They're slurpy, yeah. That's the whole point, actually, of them. Yeah.
I didn't think that the diaphragm was like that big. Sort of.
Yeah.
It's a smaller thing.
Yeah, it's big. It's big. All right.
Does that diaphragm contract or release?
Well, we are going to talk about exactly that, and that is an excellent, excellent question. All right, so let's talk about, for a moment, now that you've just kind of seen a visualization of it, come into a nice tall seat. And one of my teachers describes this as nipple to navel. So like the top of it being about here, and the little crew of the diaphragm, the little legs of the diaphragm being on your lumbar spine. So I just want you to imagine for a moment, you may even place your hands on your ribs. Imagine this sheet-like muscle that literally like transverses your body from front to back, attaches down to the lower ribs, right, and kind of makes this nice little dome up inside of you. And as you inhale, visualize the diaphragm descending, going down. Then as you exhale, visualize it floating back up. Like a little jellyfish, pulsating. And as you inhale, visualize the diaphragm attached to the bottom of your lungs. So as you inhale, the diaphragm actually pulls your lungs down slightly. And then as you exhale and it floats back up, the lungs return back to their earlier shape. Good, and then let that go. So here's a question. When you inhale, is the diaphragm contracting or releasing? Releasing, contracting. I know. Don't worry. You can't get it wrong. You're not supposed to know this yet. It's releasing. She says, "I'm making a stand."
Yeah. I was trying to blend the two words
It's conleasing.
But to let your lungs, if your lungs are going to expand, right?
Yes.
It's doing work to come.
It's doing work. It's contracting. So we're going to look at the mechanics of the breath right now and see how that happens. But it doesn't always feel like that, because sometimes when we inhale, we feel more relaxed. So it's like sometimes it's counterintuitive for us. But as you inhale, the diaphragm contracts on itself and actually pulls down. It's doing work. And as it does that, we're going to look at exactly what happens. But it's contracting as you inhale, relaxing back as you exhale. So now we're going to look at how all of this works together. So this is a dude named Boyle. He published this thing called Boyle's Law in 1662 about the inverse relationship between pressure and volume. And we're going to see how this affects how we breathe. So basically, imagine for a moment, you guys, this will be super intuitive to you. If you have a scuba tank, my friend, if you have a scuba tank which has got high pressure in it and you release it, which way does the air flow? Out. Right? It's going from high pressure to low pressure, right? This is why wind happens. You have a high pressure system, a low pressure system. Something that has higher pressure wants to move to something that's got lower pressure, right? So if let's say I have a bunch of air in a space, and then I make that space smaller, does that air become more pressurized? Yeah, it becomes higher pressure, right? And it wants to flow out. So this is the same way that you work, basically. Your diaphragm is attached to the bottoms of your lungs. Okay, so here you have this muscle attached to it. So when the diaphragm contracts and pulls down, it's increasing the volume of your lungs. It's making them bigger. So because of that, air wants to flow in. So imagine you've got an accordion, for example, you know? So you got a little accordion, you pull it apart, air rushes in to fill the vacuum, right? When you squeeze it and you make it smaller, air rushes out to balance. So we're like a little accordion. So you imagine a little accordion here. The diaphragm is the thing that's pulling your lungs apart, making more space in there, so air wants to flow in. And then when you compress it, air wants to go out. So that's how we work. We think that we inhale, we think that we choose to inhale and then we expand, but we actually have it backwards. The diaphragm contracts and then the air rushes in. Neat, huh? Right? So this is why there's lots of good, I guess I don't have the sound on for this. This is James Bond movie. This is why you have lots of great funny movies about like high pressured cockpits where everything flies out through the windows, right? Which actually doesn't really happen, but it's the idea. When you're in a plane, we're flying in like low pressure, but we have to pressurize it so we can breathe. So many movies have been based on this idea that things get sucked out of the windows.
It's amazing he fit to the window.
I don't think he'd actually fit in the window, right? So this is like the accordion. So our lungs are accordion. As you pull them apart and create more volume, air rushes in to fill the vacuum, and then conversely, when you contract that space, air moves out. And so that's how we breathe, which is really kind of cool. Does that make sense to you guys? Any questions about that? I know it can be a little counterintuitive at first. All right. Good. All right, sweet. It was the James Bond movie that did it, wasn't it? That was really what stuck it home. Okay. So the benefits of breathing. So breathing is really good for you. So the descent of the diaphragm Like you can see here in this little guy here, the descent of the diaphragm, not only does this of course bring air into our body and provide us with oxygen, but it also, we have all these internal organs down here, and as we breathe, the diaphragm moves down and gives them like a little squishy massage, right? So you think about the diaphragm is always massaging your internal organs. So congestion is not good for us. Movement is good for us. Moving fluids through our body is good for us. Moving our viscera around is good for us. Preventing adhesions is good for us. So in yoga particularly, when we do weird things like twists and then we breathe and we kind of move and squishy all this stuff, like that's a really nourishing, yummy thing to do. It's like going and getting a visceral massage, but you do it all the time, right? And in fact, what's really lovely about this is that the diaphragm is connected fascially to your heart. Your heart's not like stuck on your ribs. Your heart kind of rides on your diaphragm. It's connected there. And so every time you breathe, you're giving your heart like this little massage. Isn't that nice? Oh, heart massage. So this is kind of, Donna Farhi says this in the breathing book. She says, she's talking about the fascial connection in the heart and the diaphragm. She says that it's sort of a built-in heart massage, and because the vena cava pierces the diaphragm, the action described above, the movement of the diaphragm, actually causes the vena cava to be increased in size momentarily. So there's actually like the massaging of those blood vessels too that go through the diaphragm. So it's like all very squishy and delishy. Oh. So this is just another picture where you can see the diaphragm and the internal organs and how packed they are in there. And imagining this moving down and like squishing your stomach and your abdominals and everything. Right. So there are other muscles that do help you breathe. And we touched on some of them earlier, which is the intercostals. So these are located between the ribs. Now, an interesting thing is like when we, the intercostals help by lifting and raising the ribs up, which is the same thing. They're attached, the ribs kind of are stickied to the lungs, right? They're kind of suctioned onto the lungs. And so when the ribs lift up, that's also increasing the lung volume. So in the same way that our accordion is working, the ribs actually work to do that accordion action as well. So that's increasing the volume so that more air comes in. So they can help. So other muscles, basically anything that attaches to your ribs is an accessory muscle to breathing in some way. So keep in mind that the diaphragm is the big mover and shaker. The diaphragm is the big Mac Daddy of the breath. But we have so many muscles that actually attach down onto our ribs. Like these guys attach down into the sternocleidomastoid, right? The scalenes are these muscles of the neck that reach down and attach. The pec major and pec minor run from your sternum to your upper arm. Your quadratus lumborum, which is a muscle in the back, attaches from your pelvis to your lower ribs. So really, so many muscles are involved in this whole system of you breathing. So the moral of that story is that, like, you know, if your scalenes are tight, maybe that's impacting your breathing. If your psoas is kind of funky, which is a big hip flexor that we'll talk about when we look at the hip, but that attaches, that interdigitates, right, with some of the fibers of your diaphragm. Your abdominals, if they're tight, that could impact your breathing. So everything is connected to your breath. It's not just like the diaphragm is this isolated thing. Everything is connected together. Your whole body breathes. Have you ever seen a little baby breathe? Like a little baby. And it's like their whole body's like, right? It's like the whole self breathes. And so over time in life, when we're practicing, you know, when we have our habitual, like this is how we all sit, right? I'm kind of exaggerating, but not so much. So when we practice and teach yoga, and we're asking people to become aware of where they feel their breath, and we're asking them to open their body and to like expand and to stretch out some of these muscles, it's like, it's not just about their muscles, everybody. It's also about how they're able to breathe and be embodied. And we're asking people to become more functional, not just with their hamstrings, but also like literally with this life force that moves through them. Like that's huge. So educating people on posture and breath is like, has like repercussions far outside of the studio, or far outside of, oh great, my quads are stronger. Like it's really important to reclaim this. And in my opinion, Breathing isn't like, we're not supposed to breathe a certain way. We want to, though, have lots of flexibility in how we're able to breathe. So people say, well, how should I breathe? We're going to look at some different kinds of breathing in a sec. But it's like, there's no right way to breathe. There's only the right way for your body under certain conditions. And we want to have as much flexibility. So when you did this exercise and you felt the breath in different parts of your body, right? It's like we want to have that kind of resilience so that our body can breathe into the ribs. It can breathe into the collarbones. It can breathe into the upper back. Chronic muscle tightness and tension and things like that will start locking down our breath capacity. So when we practice yoga and we invite students to feel their breath in different parts of the body, it's like we're unlocking those spaces again so people can breathe functionally, which, as we've seen, has like wide-ranging implications for how we feel emotionally, right, and how we self-regulate. Soapbox down. Coming over here. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between chest breathing and belly breathing. Anyone want to take a guess? The air isn't going into your belly when you breathe into your belly, is it?
No.
So why is your belly poofing out?
To help with that.
When you just breathe normally into your belly. So forget Kapalabhati for just a second, but we will come back to it. So when you inhale, like in your laying, your belly pooches out. If you're not breathing air into your belly, what exactly is happening?
You're making room.
You're making room. Huh? What's that? Well, you're actually not, interestingly enough, you're actually not using your muscles. So what happens is that here's the diaphragm, right, as a nice big jellyfish. When your abdominal muscles are relaxed, right, then they're kind of soft and squishy. Everyone lay on your back for a sec. Come lay on your back. Relax. Bring your hands onto your belly. Good. And relax your shoulders. Yeah, put your head down. Good. Now, do you mind if I... You'll probably just breathe into your chest with a bolster underneath your chest. Yeah. So now allow yourself to breathe down into your belly. Let your belly be nice and soft. And some of us might feel like it's actually hard to breathe into the belly. Some of you might feel like this is supernatural. Don't worry. There's no right or wrong answer here. But what's happening is that your abdominal muscles are relaxed. So when your abdominal muscles are relaxed, then your diaphragm can push down into your viscera. And like you have a whole little gaggle of water balloons down there, your diaphragm kind of pooches and squishes the water balloons out. And because the abdominal cavity is relaxed, it can kind of poof out into your hands. And usually this is fairly relaxed. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do is engage your abdominals. So knit your lower ribs towards the pelvis. Gather in a little bit, like draw your hip points together. And so the belly wall is now firm. The abdominals are firm. And that's like kind of adding a little wall to the canister here. And now notice where your breath goes. Where do you feel your breath now? Yeah. Your chest, your ribs, maybe even your back, maybe your armpits. Does anybody not feel that? Okay, good. So come on up and sit. So what happens when we're breathing into our belly is that this is all soft and squishy, so the diaphragm just goes through the path of least resistance, right? It pushes down, the nice soft squishy internal organs kind of bulge out, and then it pops back. But when this is engaged, when we contain this, all of a sudden the diaphragm can't go down anymore and squish the lower belly out because there's like a little barrier here. So instead the diaphragm flares out and lifts your ribs up. So when you're running, for example, and your core is engaged, you're going to be breathing a lot more into your chest. The chest really works, and that helps get you more oxygen. Right? When we're relaxed and we're just chilling out and we don't have to engage our core, then the breath moves down there quite naturally. Make sense? Yeah? So the breath wants to be able to shift and move and be in different parts of your body depending on what your needs are. When we practice Ujjayi Pranayama, traditionally, like in an Ashtanga practice, Ujjayi Pranayama is created by lifting through the pelvic floor, so you're containing the orifices down here and pulling this little sling up. You're gathering your core in, Uddiyana Bandha, Mula Bandha. All this is engaged. All of the breath in Ujjayi traditionally happens in the chest. There's no belly breathing in Ujjayi. In traditional Ashtanga, it's all about the ribs moving. Mula Bandha and the core stays engaged the whole time. I'm not totally a fan of that because I think it's really good to release your pelvic floor and have lots of different ways to breathe. But just so you guys know, traditionally that's what that is, because the core is engaged the whole time. What's that? Ujjayi, victorious breath, or you might know it as ocean breath. Yeah, so usually, taught traditionally in Ashtanga, that's core engaged, it's all chest breathing. Because there's so much like bandha happening, so much core action happening.
But there's a difference between chest breathing, like costal breathing, and like up here breathing.
Then what's the difference?
Well, more core engagement through here versus, I would say, bracing. Breathe up here.
I'm trying to imagine. Oh, like,
So,
I'm trying to just try to breathe up here. So if you wanted to just breathe way up here, how would you have to manage that?
it's kind of, that's more of those accessory muscles. So when you get sore when you're breathing,
Yeah.
too much of this.
Too much of these muscles working?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
also someone who's having trouble breathing.
Yeah.
And they're bringing
And
in
struggling?
all the muscles that they can use to try to get that breath.
Because it's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're only using like the top part of your lung.
Oh,
Whereas rib breathing,
yeah.
expansion down here, is more, you're actually getting capacity still.
But yeah, because in the case of asthma, though, that's because the air is trapped. It's not getting out.
That's got to
They
feel
only
bad.
have this little, they only have
Is that
this
like the
space to work with. Yeah.
kind of breathing? Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
You see it a lot with people that have trauma too.
Yeah,
Breathe
yeah.
up here, they don't breathe.
Yeah. Did you guys see that? Was really interesting. Did you hear that? Like breathing versus this. What would you call this? What was this
I
called?
call it apical,
Apical.
right breathing, or just that accessory, like you can
Yeah.
see the neck muscles working
Yeah.
to breathe, and the shoulders maybe even.
Yeah, trying to move to help, right? Okay.
I really struggle
Cool.
to catch my breath a lot when I find myself feeling
Right.
why I yawn in class. If you see that, sometimes I can only catch my breath.
Yeah. So when we do Kapalabhati, to come back to Kapalabhati, Kapalabhati is when the exhale is assisted by the abdominals. So you snap the abdominals in or draw the abdominals in and up as a way of forcing the exhale out. So it's like,
And as you relax, the air comes in.
and as you relax, the air comes in naturally, right? Yeah, so the air drops in Kapalabhati. There's other kinds of breathing where you do Bastrika, where you do both. But in Kapalabhati, it's like a short, sharp exhale, and then it's almost like the inhale is a rebound. Just kind of drops in, kind of effortlessly. So, breathing style. So, in my opinion, the moral of the story of breathing is that the diaphragm is the primary muscle, and depending on what's tight, what is functional or not functional in the body, what can be open, that will change how you feel the breath. I think yoga is an amazing opportunity to make people, one, aware of their breath, aware of their breath patterns, and to help to create space, mobility, flexibility to be able to breathe in a whole bunch of different ways, so that outside in the real world, your body is actually able to adapt with resilience to the circumstances and breathe in a way that is functional for you. So I love that yoga focuses on the breath as an intrinsic part of the practice, because it's so tied into our nervous system and to how we feel, that having awareness of our breath is like the first step into having breath control and being able to manage some of those things which can be really challenging: panic, anxiety, depression, like all of those things too, right? So the magic bullet of the yoga practice to me is breath and breath awareness. So different kinds of yoga styles will use different breathing practices. None of them are right or wrong. So it's different. Like again, I mentioned, like Ashtanga uses Ujjayi, which is actually quite firm in the core, and then there's a lot of chest breathing. Other yoga practices will do a lot of belly breathing. So just to know that there's no one right way to breathe, but there's lots of different styles, and you can kind of ask, okay, what do I get? What do I gain? What do I lose? And what's the experience that I'm trying to create for my students? And pranayama can be very potent. And you'll cover pranayama in your pranayama section. So one last piece here is just to think about intra-abdominal pressure, right? So when we inhale and engage our abdominals, that creates it kind of pressurizes the abdominal canister, which stiffens the lumbar spine and creates support. And I think that's why a lot, like when we naturally exert ourselves, we go, right, to create like that extra stability. It's something we do quite naturally when we're lifting things or stuff like that. But that's sort of what's happening. We're inhaling in and then pressurizing the abdominal canister, which helps to stabilize the back. It's not something I would overuse in yoga. You don't want to like create a hernia. Like a hernia is when things pop out and they shouldn't. But just so that you know that that's kind of what's happening with that system, is that you can pressurize it. All right. Any questions about breathing?
Just one little thing.
Of course.
Just that breathing exercise that we did on each other. Do you think that would be beneficial to practice on maybe like a loved one or something if they were feeling anxious?
Oh my gosh. I totally think so. As long as I would maybe start with them face down, because it does feel very exposing to have your belly open like that. Did you guys find that relaxing? Oh my gosh, isn't that delightful? It's amazing how fast it switched too. Like we were doing that for just a couple of minutes, right? It was like, oh,
I also find the whole time we're talking about breath, my breath is weird. Does anybody else feel that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I just always find it interesting when you're like, now just pay attention to your breath without changing it. But the
Yeah.
moment I pay attention to it, like,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, come on. Like, how is that even possible? You know what I mean? Like, I find that's always
I know, it's like,
for me, because I'm like, okay, too late. It's already
it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't observe a system without changing it.
And I always question breathing into my kidneys, but
Oh yeah, it's an idea. It's an idea.
I know it's an image.
That's like breathe into your belly, really? You know, yeah, it's an image. It's like, that's like one of the crazy things. Plug your arm bones into their sockets. You're like, that's not what's happening. It's not what's happening. But we say funny things in yoga that actually are anatomically untrue. So our goal here is just to know that we're doing that we're speaking in metaphors.
Yeah.
Breathe into your kidneys.
Poetry.
Yeah.
Poetry.